Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to CSS Lesson 7. Today we're going to be talking about pseudo-elements. So I recommend you watch the pseudo-classes video first and then watch this video. Pseudo-elements and pseudo-classes go kind of hand in hand. If you couldn't tell by the, first part of the word pseudo, hopefully that made sense. And you can watch this video. There's some other cool stuff we can do with pseudo-elements. So let's go ahead and ask ourselves the question, what are pseudo-elements and how are they different than pseudo-classes? Well, pseudo-elements are used when you want to style a specific part of an element. So you can add content before and after an element, change the style of the first letter or first line of an element. Now, the syntax is very, very similar to pseudo-classes. We have our selector, then the only difference is we have a double colon, and then the pseudo-element itself. So this could be before, after, first line, first letter. And then same thing with the pseudo-class. We have style decorations for that pseudo-element. So again, the pseudo-element is useful for styling specific parts of an element as opposed to the entire element. So that's something to keep in mind. So let's take a look at some examples here. Alright, so we've got 5 different pseudo-elements we're going to look at today. So we've got the after element, which is going to add content after whatever tag we've selected, which in this case is h1. The before pseudo-element, which is going to add elements or content before the selected elements. Then we have the first letter, the first line, and the selection pseudo-elements. So let's go through those one by one. So right now my heading just says welcome to Rockets Galore. Notice I don't have an image tag anywhere in here, do I? But there is an image to the right of that. That is because I used the h1 : after pseudo-element, and then I put this content here, this image, as you can see that link there. The only problem with this that I'll say is that you cannot resize this image. So if I went ahead and did, if I went ahead and changed the width of this, let's watch what happens. Width, say 400 pixels. See what happens. Notice nothing happened. So when you use these after and before ones, you're not going to be able to control the width of this image. It's not going to allow that. It's going to be whatever size that image is. So if you want to use an image, you need to make sure that it's a small image. Otherwise, it's going to mess up your entire website. So as you can tell, though, it added it after my first heading. Then there's the one called before. So like after, instead of adding it afterwards, we're adding something before. So right now my content says : exciting, which means I am adding a string, right? So quotations around this string, and notice I have a little space here as well. So if we go down here, notice this heading, all it says is new research, but we go over here and it says exciting new research. So what I did is I used this before pseudo-element, and I added this content exciting before that heading. So anytime I would use h2, it would go ahead and pop up. So if I even if I just did a blank second heading, let's see what happens. h2. It just adds exciting automatically. So keep that in mind. Like if you apply it to the h2 tag, every h2 second heading that you're going to use is going to have exciting before it, unless you want to, make another class for this and say, class equals first, and then you could go up here and say h2 dot first, and now it's only going to be that one with that class. So you can mix classes, pseudo-elements, and pseudo-classes together and create more control. So notice I still have this heading here and it doesn't have anything in it. I could put another and that'll show up, but it won't have the exciting before it. So using classes is going to allow you greater control. Again, classes are extremely useful. I really push classes and IDs. So make sure you're using those. So as you can tell, remember I did this heading has a class, which is first, and this heading does not. And now I can define just for that first heading a pseudo-element. The next pseudo-element that we could look at is the first letter. So notice it says font-size 300%, and that's for a paragraph tag. If we go over and look, for my paragraph tag, it says this website. The T is a lot larger because it is the first letter and it's only the first letter. So that's something that's kind of cool you can play around with. I know on certain websites they like to do that with the large letter. You can go ahead and do that. You could even change the font family if you wanted. I could do font-family Comic Sans MS if you were, feeling a little weird, and now that, oh, that looks awful, but, you know, it's there, and it's Comic Sans, and I'm gonna delete that, because that looks, that just looks really not great. Not great. Let's change that back, please. Oh, boy. It's terrible. That's much better. Okay, alright. So, anyways, first letter, we'll change the first letter of the element you have selected, which in this case is my paragraph. Notice it didn't do that to the headings, it's just for the selected tag. Okay? Now there's the first line, which is going to change the attributes or styles of the first line. So right now I have the color green, which means that the first line will be a different color. Now, one thing about this is the first line is not always the first line, so it's not consistent. So watch what happens when I do this. So if I grab this and select and move it over, notice the first line gets smaller, right? Because my window is changing. So well, obviously it's limited by that window, but notice now the first line has more words, less words, more words, less words. So the first line can change. It is just the first line before the window has to drop that paragraph down to the next line. So it might not always be that first line unless you were to put a line break, right? BR here. Now, only this will be green no matter what, because it's always the first line because I use this line break. So if you only want specific things to be that color or style, you need to make sure you use line breaks, okay? Keep that in mind. The final pseudo element I want to talk about is actually kind of cool. It's the selection. So normally when you select things, it's going to be like this blue color, right? So blue color, and then the text is going to change to the white color in the background. I did it so that it's going to be the background color green and the color white for this paragraph. So now if we highlight it, notice, ooh, that's kind of nice. I like that actually. That looks really cool. So you can change the selection color or the highlight color of elements if you want. So go ahead and play around with that. It's kind of fun. Alright, so let's go ahead and summarize what we've covered. Alright, so pseudo elements, again, just style specific parts of an element. The first one we talked about was the after pseudo element, which adds content after the element. And that was how we added that image after every single first heading. There's also the before tag, or before pseudo element, which does the same thing. It just adds it before, though, instead. Then we have the first line, which is going to change the style of the first line of an element. And again, these are all applying to parts of an element and not the entire element itself. So again, pseudo element style specific parts of an element, not the entire element. Then we have the first letter, which changes the style of the first letter of the element. And then the last one, which I think is the coolest, is the selection pseudo element, which changes the style of elements highlighted by you in the browser. So those are 5 pseudo elements that you can use. And remember, you can use pseudo elements, pseudo classes, and classes all together. So go ahead and experiment around with those. And again, we're going to have a CSS Lesson 8 is going to be talking about navigation bars and menus, and we're going to be using these. So I highly recommend you know how to use these before you try to jump in and make yourself a menu. Okay, so thanks for watching, and we'll do another video soon.